Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants is useful in understanding interaction with computing technology and the changes to society brought about by digital technologies. Yet criticisms bring into question the effectiveness of this dichotomy and suggest that rather than an opposition of two groups, there is a continuum of digital fluency. This presentation will look at the terms digital natives and digital immigrants, their effect on education, criticisms of the dichotomy, and a suggested new revolution. The internet as we know it has a short history. Things like Wikipedia, Facebook, YouTube were only launched in this millennia, with Instagram only being launched in 2010. The first introduction to the term digital natives was coined originally by Marc Prensky in two seminal articles and established the traits of digital natives in 2001. Prensky is not the first person to try and identify a new distinct generation of humans, and digital natives isn't the only term for them. Other common terms come from Oblinger and Tapscott, who use the same term, net generation, and Howe and Strauss use the term millennials. Along with Prensky's term digital natives, these all describe the same generation. But for the purposes of this presentation, we are looking at Prensky's dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants, as Prensky notes he has found this to be the most useful designation. Prensky defines digital natives as today's students, native speakers, and represent the first generation to grow up with the new technology. They have spent their entire lives surrounded by and using computers and tools of the digital age. Computer games, email, the internet are all integral parts of their lives. Many, if not most students, have never grown a world without computers. It is further suggested by Palfrey and Gasser that digital natives are children who were born and raised in the digital world. They are also seen as a new generation of young people, and this generation of young people are assumed to be inherently technology savvy. The Economist notes that it is roughly those born between 1980 and 2000. However, Kotropoulos notes that the dates do vary from author to author, but says that this is not by much. Whilst the characteristics attributed to this new generation blend easily from author to author. Young Gates then suggest that digital natives received digital input while growing up. Thus the function of their brains are more likely to be different, as they think differently from digital immigrants. Prensky notes that as digital immigrants learn to adapt to their environment, they always retain to some degree their accent, that is, their foot in the past. The digital immigrant accent can be seen in such things as turning to the internet for information second rather than first, by reading the manual for a program rather than assuming the program itself will teach us to use it. Prensky further argues that today's older folk were socialised differently from their kids and are now in the process of learning a new language, and a language learned later in life, scientists tell us, goes into a different part of the brain, further suggesting that the function of the brains of digital natives is most likely to be different from that of digital immigrants. Like all immigrants, though, some do this better than others. Palfrey and Gasser note digital immigrants have to relearn to live lives of digital immersion rather than digital natives who learned in digital the first time round. They further argue that unlike those who are a shade older, this new generation didn't have to relearn anything to live lives of digital immersion. Digital immigrants are therefore those who learnt to use computers at some stage during their adult life, and as such, they are usually assumed to have some difficulty with information technology. Young and Gates suggest that digital immigrants refer to those who were not born into a digital world, and argue that they adopted new technologies at some point later in their lives. There is something, then, inherently different from those of a younger generation who are used to using technology and internet, and those who learned the technology later in life, perhaps those who teach. Prensky argues that our digital immigrant instructors, or teachers, who speak an outdated language, that of the pre-digital age, are struggling to teach a population that speaks an entirely new language. It is argued by Young and Gates that today's students are not the same as those in the past. They were born into a digital age, and technologies are therefore an integral part of their lives. When today's students come into the classroom, then, instead of going to the library to search for information, it may be suggested that they turn to Google to be able to search the internet. Young and Gates further suggest that today's students are therefore no longer the people the educational system is designed to teach. This notion, then, that the educational system is failing those children that are being taught is further argued by Prensky, noting that there are differences between the digital native students and their digital immigrant teachers, and Prensky argues that these differences lie at the root of a great many of today's educational problems. It is then suggested, as in The Economist, that these are simply sweeping generalisations. Vedhanthan, in The Economist, argues that this is an essentially wrong-headed argument, and argues that Prensky's dichotomy assumes that children have some special path to digital awareness, and that they understand something that teachers don't, and argue that digital immigrant teachers have to catch up with them. Bennett, Maton and Kervin further argue it may be that there is as much variation within the digital native generation as between the generations. Furthermore, they claim that there might be a particular learning style or set of learning preferences, characteristics of that generation of young people, and argue that this is slightly problematic as the characteristics may differ within the generation. In The Economist, Wesch argues many of his incoming students have only a superficial familiarity with the digital tools that they use regularly, rather than all tools. There are other overgeneralizations put forth by authors like Prensky. For example, that the digital natives have a set of skills with digital technologies that is perfected. This, however, is not always the case. Sometimes a certain set of skills is also not transferable over to academia. However, it may be argued that these criticisms completely miss Prensky's point. In an evaluation, it may be suggested that Prensky is not saying digital natives have great technological skills, but it may be that he is saying the way in which they interact with the technology, the way in which they use it to get the information, and the use of it as a tool is different to the way digital immigrants use the internet. It could be argued that Prensky is actually saying it is a certain generation that use it as a tool, rather than saying everyone of a certain age automatically knows codes. A further suggestion may be made that the dichotomy refers to the interaction and assumptions about the importance of the technology in their lives, not specific technological knowledge or technical literacy. After all, not everyone born between 1980 and 2000, roughly, as in The Economist, has access to digital technologies. Kotropoulos argues that Prensky's writings, as well as other digital native authors' writings, expect the statistics of digital natives to hold true across the board, regardless of socio-economic background or country of origin. Research has shown that the location does matter. In the US, Smith and Caruso 2010 see different levels of computer and web technology usage among the same demographic of digital natives, and argue that it differs between the socio-economic backgrounds of those digital natives. Van Sky therefore questions the global reach of the digital native. It is argued by International Telecommunication Union that there are relatively low internet usage rates in many developing countries, especially those with large youth populations. In 2007, by which time young people had to be online in order to be considered digital natives today, needing at least 5 years' experience, has suggested that the internet penetration in those developing countries was actually relatively low in 2007, with only 21% of the global population being online. So, everyone in the generation being a digital native could be considered a Western view of the world, or as Western rates of development around the internet rather than global. The internet was only pioneered in Africa in 2000 by a professor, as internet needs time to mature and a group of people to get used to it. Digital natives are developing later in certain parts of the world. Perhaps it could be suggested that there are waves of digital natives in different parts of the world. In terms of widening access to the internet, mobile technologies and mobile internet connection is at the forefront. This is an easier and much cheaper way of connecting. Mobile internet connections now outsell traditional ones. This is pointed out by West, and he argues that this has a more equalising quality. This new revolution through mobiles is almost like skipping a generation of technology, and as such it may be more apt to refer to digital native generation in developing countries as mobile natives and mobile immigrants. The terminology used, as suggested by Wang, Myers and Sundaram, has another criticism. They suggest that there is a continuum rather than a rigid dichotomy between digital natives and digital immigrants, and conceptualise this as digital fluency. Digital fluency is the ability to reformulate knowledge and produce information to express oneself creatively and appropriately in a digital environment. This may then be a more helpful way of understanding our interaction with computer technologies. So, to conclude, the internet as we know it has a short history. Prensky argues that generational differences within using technology constitutes a problem. However, there are problems with this dichotomy of digital natives and digital immigrants. Bennett, Maton and Kervin challenge the notion of a homogeneous generation with technical expertise and a distinctive learning style, and suggest that there are variations and differences within the population, arguing that these variations and differences may be more significant to educators. The picture, then, is not black and white. As digital native writers would have us think, there are many variables that go into creating the stereotypical digital native. Location is important, as well as socio-economic status. And whilst the digital native and digital immigrant dichotomy is a helpful way of understanding interaction with technology, there are many drawbacks that cast doubt over how effective the dichotomy is, and suggest that it may be better understood as a continuum of digital fluency.